Okay, let's try to get this thing done this time. Come on. Hmm. Well, finally. So like I said, I had to put together a system from scratch, so it's not the best, it's not the fastest. So sometimes things hang up when I got too much going on. I've got a security scan and 3 windows open, and it's enough to lock up this thing. Okay. All right. Nothing in my experience convinces me that such risks are warranted by any real necessity, although such powers would, of course, be an executive convenience. That it is a judge, that is Justice Jackson, that is quote that I'm quoting here in what he wrote. In the practical working of our government, we already have evolved a technique within the framework of the Constitution by which normal executive powers may be considerably expanded to meet an emergency. Congress may and has granted extraordinary authorities which lie dormant in normal times, but may be called into play by the executive in war or upon proclamation of a national emergency. In 1939, upon congressional request, the Attorney General listed 99 such separate statutory grants by Congress of emergency or wartime executive powers. They were invoked from time to time as need appeared. Under this procedure, we retain government by law, special, temporary law perhaps, but law nevertheless. The public may know the extent and limitations of the powers that can be asserted, and persons affected may be informed from the stature of their rights and duties. In view of the ease, expedition, and safety with which Congress can grant and has granted large emergency powers, certainly ample to embrace this crisis, I am quite unimpressed with the argument that we should affirm possession of them without statute. Such power either has no beginning or it has no end. If it exists, it need submit to no legal restraint. I am not alarmed that it would plunge us straightway into dictatorship, but it is at least a step in that wrong direction. But I have no illusion that any decision by this court can keep power in the hands of Congress if it is not wise and timely in meeting its problems. A crisis that challenges the President equally, or perhaps primarily, challenges Congress. If not good law, there was worldly wisdom in the maxim attributed to Napoleon that the tools belong to the man who can use them. We may say that power to legislate for emergency belongs in the hands of Congress, but only Congress itself can prevent power from slipping through its fingers. So that's who you need to point your finger at first, people. If you want to point your finger at anybody, it's got to be Congress. They've let this continue. The essence of our free government is leave to live by no man's leave, underneath the law, to be governed by those impersonal forces which we call law. Our government is fashioned to fulfill this concept as far as humanly possible. The executive, except for recommendation and veto, has no legislative power. The executive action we have here originates in the original will of the President and represents an exercise of authority without law. No one, perhaps not even the President, knows the limits of the powers he may seek to exert in this instance, and the parties affected cannot learn the limit of their rights. We do not know today what powers over labor or property would be claimed to flow from government possession if we should legalize it, what rights to compensation would be claimed or recognized, or in what contingency it would end. With all its effects, delays, and inconveniences, men have discovered no technique for long preserving free government except that the executive be under the law and that the law be made by parliamentary deliberations. Such institutions may be destined to pass away, but it is the duty of the court to be last, not first, to give them up. Check my time. Okay. With these guidelines and against the background of experience of the last 40 years, the task that remains for the special committee is to determine, in close cooperation with all the standing committees of the Senate and all departments, commissions, and agencies of the executive branch, which of the laws now in force might be of use in a future emergency. Most important, a legislative formula needs to be devised which will provide a regular and consistent procedure by which any emergency provisions are called into force. It will also be necessary to establish a means by which Congress can exercise effective oversight over such actions as are taken pursuant to the state of national emergency, as well as providing a regular and consistent procedure for the termination of such grants of authority. Textual note: compiling the text of emergency power statutes pursuant to Senate Resolution 9 of January 6, 1973, the U.S. Senate directed the Special Committee on the Termination of the National Emergency to study and investigate emergency powers legislation now in force. From the outset of its work, the Special Committee faced the problem of determining with reasonable accuracy the number, nature, and extent of emergency statutes passed by Congress since 1933, which delegated extraordinary powers to the President in times of crisis or impending catastrophe. It was evident initially that existing listings of executive emergency powers were either out of date or inadequate for the Special Committee's purposes. It became apparent, too, that the United States government has been operating under an unrelieved state of emergency of 40 years' duration. During this period, an enormous body of laws dealing with severe economic crises and America's response to 3 wars had been passed by Congress through an almost unnoticed process of gradual accretion. Let me check my time. Oh, come on. No, 8:15. Okay. In the past, the only way to compile a catalog useful to Congress would have required going through every page of the 86 volumes of the statutes at large. Fortunately, U.S. Code 1970 edition and 1 supplement was put onto computer tapes by the United States Air Force in the so-called LITE system, LITE, which is located at a military facility in the state of Colorado. I'm not going to get into that. That's a need to know. The Special Committee staff, working in conjunction with the Justice Department, the Library of Congress, and the General Accounting Office, devised several programs for computer searches. These programs were based on a wide spectrum of keywords and phrases contained in typical provisions of law which delegate extraordinary powers. I think I'm about up on my time. Yep. So, a short one to follow, and that'll be the end of this document. And thank you again for bearing with me and hearing this text as it speaks for itself. I am just a tool